Welcome to the fall 2025 edition of Silicon Valley The U.S. government. We'll have a few people trickling in here. I take it by being here, everyone cares about the important relationship between Silicon Valley and U.S. government. We're going to talk about that throughout the course, both from a defense and national security perspective, but also a lot of other perspectives. But we have a great panel today. Some of them I know well, but I'm going to do a quick introduction, then we'll do a little moderated discussion and give you a chance to ask some questions. But my good friend Chris Moran, who runs Lockheed Ventures, been at Lockheed for a while. Full disclosure, he's a big supporter of a class we teach here at Stanford called Hacking for Defense. Anyone veterans of Hacking for Defense here? Heard of the class? Okay. Anyways, it's a great course. If you want to learn more about that, you can talk to me or Chris. He was actually instructor last year.
Hopefully we'll do it again.
Keep him going there.
If you invite me again.
But thanks, Chris, for joining. And Jody Addiego, I partner at Brave Capital. A lot of people from my generation in the military, and I'll tell you about myself real quickly, joined the military after 9/11. And Joe, as I understand, you kind of got into defense IC investing in In-Q-Tel after 9/11,
In-Q-Tel, right after 9/11.
Which you'll learn more about In-Q-Tel, but really special investing company there that invested initially in the intelligence community, but kind of branched out into national security more broadly. But and I think you'll find out from after this discussion just how important investing is into our defense IC and other national security areas. Okay, and Janelle Teng, no stranger to Stanford, a Stanford grad, 2014 I think it was.
That's right.
But she actually, we were just chatting. She started out with a kind of almost all Stanford founded company called Relate IQ, became Salesforce IQ. But now she's at Bessemer Ventures.
That's right.
And all our panelists, and I'm Joe Felter, Ernestine Fu and I are going to be the moderators for this quarter. But I have a military background. I run a center here called the Gordy Knott Center for National Security Innovation. Would welcome some interest in that. If you want to do work in international security, national security on Stanford, we'd love to help you out. But I have a military background and Defense Department, been at Stanford for a while. Okay, so all our panelists have some experience or current experience in defense tech investing. That's going to kind of be the theme for today. But defense technology investing, or defense tech in general, has come a long way just in the last decade plus. I mean, it is in vogue. It is cool. And I remember not too long ago, I worked closely with Palantir back when it was a startup that no one ever heard of. And you know that story. But some of the successful non-big defense primes, if you're familiar with the primes like Lockheed, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, it was really hard for some of the emerging technology companies to succeed for a whole lot of reasons. You've heard of the term the Valley of Death and other terms. And some companies managed to triumph in spite of that. Companies like Palantir, Salesforce, Anduril, SpaceX. But of those four companies, what do they all have in common?
Billionaire founder.
Do you know the answer, Chris? Come on, we're trying to get them to. They all have billionaire co-founders, right? Think about it. So, and that was, and they're great companies with great leaders and great people, but that really helped them get through that valley dip. But now we're seeing companies actually survive and make it, and this is a group of folks who know intimately well and are part of that effort to help them survive without having billionaire co-founders. So maybe I'll throw it out to the group here, but defense tech is hot. What do you see are what are the biggest, hottest trends here in 2025? And Janelle, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. I'll give one hardware trend and one software trend. And I like to put my money where my mouth is. So both of these trends I have investments in, or actually have a live term sheet out this week for one of those trends. So on the hardware side, I think a terrifically big trend is that we need hardware that is low cost and highly scalable to manufacture. And you're seeing startups pop out across the stack on the hardware side, really focused on these themes to kind of rebuild our arsenal in different areas very cheaply and effectively and scalable. So I have an unannounced missile investment based out of SoCal that is focused on ship-side defensive interceptors. So trying to make these missiles and interceptors cheaper than what Raytheon currently does today. And then on the software side, as VCs, we wouldn't be VCs if we didn't mention AI. AI, I think, is definitely transforming the DoD's tech stack. And within AI, there's a lot to be excited by. One key theme that currently have a term sheet out on is for collaborative autonomy. So this is a trend where over the last decade, we've seen the rise of unmanned technologies, right, that have led to decacorns over the last decade. And now one of the challenges stemming from kind of the proliferation of mass autonomy is that there needs to be a new kind of command and control plane to coordinate between heterogeneous systems, different vendors. And so this is a big trend. There are quite a few very interesting startups today trying to solve that critical readiness gap.
Thanks. What else is hot, guys? Joe, Chris?
Well, I mean, following along, those were my first two as well, but I'll follow with my third is, if you think about it, without energy, you can't do anything. So you've got to have energy in order to power things. And, the Army right now runs on diesel generators. They make a lot of noise. There's a great thermal signature there. It's like putting up a flag saying, here I am, come lob something at me. So, there are companies that we invested in, one called Chariot Defense, for instance, that, what they're doing is they're making electricity, high voltage systems that will be able to power things like directed energy weapons, which need a lot of voltage in order to power them, and making those mobile. And that's the kind of thing that you need out there as well. A very interesting, another energy system, a company called Aetherflux. They're basically putting solar systems in space and are going to transmit that energy down. Seems like a pretty wild and crazy idea until you know that another billionaire founder, the founder of Robinhood, is backing them. So he's a co-founder there, and so it's likely that they'll be able to skip the Valley of Death and actually be able to put something up into space. And if you think about that, we said, well, it sounds like a crazy idea to us, but think about what else you need up there. They're talking about Golden Dome. You're going to need directed energy up there for a host of reasons. You need a lot of power. And once you have all that power, distributing that back, whether it be to other satellites, ground, or using it as a weapon itself. So there's some possibility there for pivots.
Any more thoughts on that, Chris?
Yeah, of course. You know me, never start a thought. I think one of the things that we're realizing is we don't know what the future warfare is going to look like. So we need to invest in production systems that allow us to build anything at scale as rapidly as possible, shrink the time for design using Gen AI techniques to design from concept all the way through simulation to production to the production floor, and looking at everything that allows us to do that without tooling in the shortest amount of time as quickly as possible. Lockheed, we have a factory where we build the F-35. The building was built in 1940, and the production process looks like 1940. So we need to, we've got a lot to do to improve that and make it similar to what Detroit does for cars and other things like that.
Awesome. We in our Hacking for Defense class, we try to encourage our students who want to form companies. Often they form dual-use companies. They try to take advantage of what we call, have you heard the term non-dilutive capital? That you can maybe help get to prototype without losing a lot of equity to these VCs. No. Keeping your company's equity and then finding commercial opportunities to scale. But dual-use has some strengths and weaknesses. I know some companies like Anduril pretty much focus all defense, but a lot of the real successful ones, the decacorns, if you call it, have done dual-use. But your thoughts on is dual-use should be viewed as a strength or a kind of a liability or a challenge? Maybe your thoughts on that. We can start with you, Chris.
So when we started the fund in 2016, that's all we would invest in.
Dual use.
For all that reason, yeah.
Okay.
For dual use. We wanted to use the commercial side of the business to scale so that tech would find its way into defense at a reduced cost and a practiced volume, let's call it. But the last couple of years, as you mentioned, just been crazy. These defense-only companies, we can't ignore what's going on there. We have to look at those. So now we invest much more broadly. I think we're still somewhat skeptical, knowing how the government buys that type of stuff, particularly weapon systems. These companies need to have a very short runway to an exit. Otherwise, they're going to struggle. I don't care Valley death or not. The government buys, X number of missiles and they don't buy any more. And it's going to be hard if that's what your business looks like down the road if you can't figure out how to pivot or expand or be flexible in what you make.
Joe, any
Yeah,
thoughts on that?
so we don't shy away from gov-only or DoD-only businesses, but certainly agree that having a dual-use aspect, I think, for predictability of cash flows, and we can get into why that's so important when you're a defense tech business, because if you fully rely on the government to contract and fund by a certain timeline, it may or may not come in on time. So having dual use certainly helps to add some balance on the cash flow side. But that said, we were early investors in companies like Rocket Lab, Boom. They all ended up being diversified into, they may have started gov only and then diversified into dual use. So certainly see that as a strength, as long as it doesn't detract from kind of the core product focus.
Yeah, it has a lot to do with ICP, right? Who's the ideal customer for you? And if within your strategy, you can develop a strategy where dual use, you have a much firmer foundation, if it's possible. But, again, I mentioned this company before, Epirus, a directed energy weapon, there's not much dual use there. Mm-hmm. You're not going to, I don't know what other dual use there is for
They
that.
have some counter UAS capabilities, though, right? I mean, that's
But that's government only.
yeah.
Yeah, there's not much other commercial value for that.
I don't know if I was at the Super Bowl, I'd want some directed energy weapons protecting us. But, hey, so I mentioned I got to know the early crew at Palantir. Literally, when they were just starting up, I was running a terrorism center at West Point when they came up and needed some good data and a good mission. But Palantir, big success story, and I saw them go through some real challenges. You're familiar with that? Just all the antibodies. They were much better, and arguably cheaper than the programs of record, but they prevailed after a long slog, and now they're just killing it, right? But so I find that an inspirational story. But do you have one or two really inspiring defense tech companies that really you say, wow, those guys and gals did it, and why they inspire you? Maybe Janelle, back to you.
Yeah, I have to obviously give my portfolio companies a shout out here, and I led the Series A in a company called Turbine One last year. They do ML at the edge for the military, so they're actually gov only, DoD only, and in fact, one of the services is their main beachhead, so they're not necessarily even diversified across the DoD. And what was so unique about them that was contrarian is that they're software only product, which you may hear that the DoD isn't always the best at procuring software only solutions. I think they pitched to a ton of different investors, and a lot of really prolific defense tech investors said, what you're building is not a category. Like you can't win major contracts and programs based on your product. Your kind of middleware for sensors and hardware, you're going to have to rely on them. And why can't like a hardware vendor do what you do eventually and build out the software layer? Why can't Palantir do what you do on the downstream side? They can move upstream into your space, but the founder prevailed, and I'm so proud of them because just 2 weeks ago they were it's public now in the Wall Street Journal that they won a $99 million IDIQ with the Army, and they've only been in business for 4 years, so they were founded in 2021. And just tremendous success for them as a software-only startup led by a Navy veteran to be able to get this kind of contracting milestone in such a short period of time. Really, really happy for them, and I think it makes me even happier knowing it was a contrarian kind of point of view. And they just raised their Series B a couple months ago as well. So good milestone and good year for them.
Awesome. Any real inspiring companies that come to mind? Joe or Chris?
Just out of. I was on the due diligence team at Incutel that actually initially
you guys
funded
are early
Palantir.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of an interesting note.
Nicely done.
The company that I'll give as an inspiration also founded in 2021, and their last valuation was $13 billion. So imagine that, going in 4 years from 0 to 13 billion. The other thing I like about this company is it was formed by a game developer, a person out of the Ministry of Defense, and an ML expert. Anybody take a guess at what that company is? Helsing. It's a European company, and their last valuation, $13 billion. They did it by partnering with, Aerospatiale. They have a wingman as a wingman co-pilot, as a drone plane that will operate with another aircraft. They've done drones themselves, so they have quite a wide repertoire of AI focus, and they did it software only as well. Very interesting company. They did have a hiccup, so they had a partnership with Rheinmetall, who they were going to be providing all of the drone software for that, but they didn't like it, and they went with Rheinmetall instead went with a company called Auterion that Bessemer just 2 days ago announced a very large funding with. And so that's a very interesting, kind of connection there. But it just shows what can be done and quickly in the space.
Can you one-up them on anything? Or those are pretty impressive.
Yeah, a couple. We did a small satellite company about a dozen years ago. We ultimately bought the company, and we don't usually do that. Out of all the years we've been in this business, we've only bought one company, this company. This company just delivered last week 41 satellites to the SDA, the Space Development Agency, for Tranche 0, Tranche 1. So the entire IR sensing network is being reconstituted with satellites from this small satellite company that we invested in about a decade ago and ultimately bought about a year ago. So that's pretty cool. Those two contracts are worth $1 billion each. So that's not too bad for a $10 million investment to get a couple billion back. And then just yesterday, the head of the Skunk Works, you guys know that Lockheed created the Skunk Works and SR-71. If you meet anyone from the Skunk Works, they'll tell you they did the SR-71. I'm like, that was like 1953 or something, But they always talk about it.
You remember that, right, Chris?
Yeah. I was there. But anyway, he wrote a note to the head of technology in the company saying, this company we worked with, a company called Entopology, has shown us how to cut several years off the development cycle for new aerostructures. I mean, years. He said, we were going to reduce our cycle time from years to months because of the Gen AI capability built in these tools. And these guys don't mince words. I mean, the Skunk Works doesn't think anyone can do anything right except them. And when they say something like that, I pay attention to it. So.
You're going to tell us, we'd like to know.
Entopology.
Entopology. Maybe time to invest in those guys.
Based in Brooklyn, New York, of all places.
Wow.
You guys have all picked some winners and some great examples. I mean, was it $13 billion in 4 years? And what was crazy valuation for yours? And this, as investors, what do you look for? What is attractive and also what is risky when you're trying to decide where to put your money? And as far as in a defense tech company or a defense startup that's looking for investment.
So we have a little different process than these guys, right? So we're a corporate investor. So the first screen for us has got to be a strategy screen. It has to match some technology need that our the mothership has. So that's always the first screen. That's almost often the most difficult screen for us to find that tie back to the company. And then after that, we'll probably do the same things that you guys. We'll look at the team, we'll look at the technology, the opportunity, and all the usual stuff. But it's always that top one. Is this relevant? It may be really cool, but absolutely not relevant. It may not be in an area that we care about or a product that we want to have, or even a customer we may know. We're constantly getting stuff for parts of the military that we actually don't have a lot of traction with. And it's really cool, but it's not interesting to us. So that's probably the hardest thing that we have to do. But after that, we're going to look for something that's really dynamic, differentiated, as addressing a large opportunity that no one else has looked at before. And they've got a team of folks that are capable of meeting the requirements. In pivoting, I mean, agile founders are really important. And all the usual stuff after that.
So we actually have two companies that we share.
We looked at them.
That's the way. So we share a company called Hidden Level, which is they started out as a pure counter-drone company, but then they just focused on creating radar for the air littoral, which is from the ground to a couple thousand feet, which is very difficult for radar to see. And they do this in a passive way. So rather than sending their own radar, their own signal out, they basically listen, find what other signals are out there, and then listen for the bounces from those other signals from objects. So this is a counter-drone technology, but also a passive radar, which is very important. So those of you that have heard about Ukraine, you know that if you're sending out a signal in Ukraine, within 5 minutes you're a target. And so when we looked at that, we were thinking about counter-drone and the importance. We were seeing lots and lots of drones and the importance of a counter-drone technology. And they pivoted through time. They've developed additional technologies. So that's our initial focus. We want a big market. That's kind of our first pass, big market. The same as other investors. Another company that...
So why did we invest in them?
You should tell me.
So we make a lot of radars, obviously, that work at 2,000 feet and above, and nothing's protecting them. So we looked at them to protect our radars from counter drones, and that's how we're proceeding.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So that's one. Another company that we share, again, a company called RunSafe. It's a security company, and their goal was to change the equation for hackers. So, once a hacker, in an embedded system, a system that you proliferate out, which are, most of the objects that you're going to want to send out to somebody, you have the same software running in it because it's a control system generally. Once you crack one of those, you can crack them all. But what RunSafe wanted to do is they wanted, using a technology called binary mixing, where they would load the binaries onto the system at load time, and that software would be different for each instantiation of an embedded system that you put out there. And that was their vision, and we invested in them, thinking that is going to proliferate, over time. We still believe that. It's been a while for that. But Lockheed, and this one I do know why you invested in it, because you had objects that you needed to protect yourselves, and you wanted that extra protection for these objects.
So we don't make millions of them, but we can reprocess the code on the fly using that technology. So every object looks different every time. We can make it look different multiple times a day, thousands of times a day if we want.
Janelle, anything to add to this one?
We have very, very similar kind of frameworks. If you want to Google Bessemer Defense Tech, we actually open source a lot of our rubric, our good, better, best on kind of what we look for. But it is market, like we try to understand what program and what kind of money, pots of money are going after to see how big the market is. Obviously, technology, we'll go out and do demos. We'll go out and measure hardware and kind of really get our hands dirty to understand the tech diligence. But I would say for defense tech, the one kind of quite, opaque kind of criteria is what we call defense IQ. And we say that because separate from commercial, there is a very complex landscape that defense tech founders do need to navigate, both in terms of contracting and funding. And a lot of the times the macro is out of your control. And we want founders who have that DNA, that they're able to navigate kind of difficult situations. They know how to navigate this complex landscape. And you can find that DNA in many different kind of backgrounds. We've backed founders who have come from the Pentagon. I've backed former engineers, Navy engineers, veterans. Rocket Lab is based in New Zealand, actually, so not even kind of a domestic HQ company. You can find that DNA everywhere, but that, I think, is the one piece that's really hard to evaluate, but it's probably the main reason why we end up kind of backing certain founders, because we think they have high defense IQ.
All right.
Well, the other alternative is to have a co-founder that's a billionaire.
Right. Oh,
As you know.
that helps too. Yeah, it doesn't hurt.
Who is entertaining the notion of a defense tech startup here, or already involved with one? Anyone? Come on. Thinking about it? Okay, just one, just a couple more, maybes. All right, there's probably some that don't even know it yet, but what advice would you have to these defense tech founders right now to become these future wildly successful companies that you just described? Anything come up to mind if you can give them some steerage?
Well, the first one is the one that you guys.
Besides the billionaire co-founder.
That's a simple one.
Step one.
But if you can't do that, the advice that we give them is the two pieces of advice. One that's the same for any company, and that is know your customers. So we've had situations, there's 1 million drone companies out there, for instance. And we were doing diligence on one, and we went out and we were lucky enough to be able to talk to some of the people that were fielding these things. And the soldiers said, this is supposed to be for one person, and I can't, we can't carry this thing. It doesn't fit. So, it's really hard on us. Well, that company's not going to go anywhere, right? So first, know your customer, and that's the same in any startup. The second one, going to Janelle's point, the unique aspects of the defense community. It has a procurement process that's unlike anything else. Other procurement processes, there's a strategy for them. They talk about economic buyers and technical buyers and user community buyers. So there's that hope. There is a process for commercial. But when you get into the government, it's that cubed. So it's very, very difficult. You've got to, the strategy that we actually push on them is that they need to get all the way up to Washington, and they need to be talking to the people on the committees that are defining the NDAA. And if you're not doing that, you're not gonna win on these programs. And so that's our advice to them. Not only do they have to start at the users, but they've got to go all the way to Washington. And that's generally something that they don't know themselves. But there are lots of people out there that Joe can even put you in touch with that are specialists in that area. They know the staffers on the Hill that are actually writing those different documents.
Joe's emphasized to know your customer. That's really everything about this course, Hacking for Defense. If you take that, it's about this customer discovery, beneficiary discovery. You don't come with a solution, come with a guess on what the solution is and iterate based on the feedback you get from the users. But great, thanks for emphasizing that, Joe. Janelle or Chris, any advice for these up-and-coming unicorn co-founders?
Yeah, no, I listen to these folks. I mean, one of the focus has been on getting that contract, right? Get the contract. But the real problem is delivering the product. And that, I think we're just seeing the first slug of hardware defense companies get to that point. And when we look back at programs that we run, for instance, more than half the time and at least half the dollars are spent on test and certification. And very few startups even understand what that is. And I'm sure all the investors are going to get to that contract, say, yeah, you've won. And then the government's going to say, well, there's 1,000 light items you have to test for me before I'm going to put this in the hands of a Joe Felter out on the front lines. And I don't think anyone's prepared for that. And I think that's where we're about to hit that. We're going to see these first companies stumble on that. And the really supportive investors are going to help these companies through that phase. And the other ones who are just gobsmacked by the fact that it's going to be another 2 years before they can deliver on revenue are going to really have a rude awakening of what's coming. But realistically, you don't want to put a weapon system in the hands of somebody that doesn't work. Their lives depend on it. This thing has to work every single time. And you talk to any soldier, airman, seaman, whatever, who picks up some kit and it doesn't work. They drop it on the ground, they walk away from it, they never pick it up again. You don't have a second chance. You got one chance to be right. And that's this test and certification stuff that gets you to that point to do that. And we're just starting to see that now come through.
Janelle, you could be sitting in these seats and you'd fit right in here with the Stanford students. You're a little bit closer to these students. Maybe your perspective, if they want to be you someday, or not you, but if they want to get capital from someone like you, or right now, but some advice for them. So.
Yeah, I would say maybe we've been jaded because we've back to have a long track record in defense tech. We're very bullish on the opportunity. It's a huge market, very sticky customer. The mission need is critical, especially in today's day and age, but it will be probably harder and longer than you expect things to take. And that's just something that I think every defense tech founder has to internalize. And you want to find the right investors who understand the landscape, can be supportive. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard a founder pitch, I'm going to get my program a record in a year. And then it's like 4 years later and you're still in the grind, and just don't get discouraged. It is a lot harder than building a commercial business, but at the same time, the reward is also bigger, both in terms of dollars, but also the contributions that you're making to national security. I think that's actually what drives most of the founders. So certainly keep that North Star, even as things seem hard from contracting funding. We actually keep a timeline of benchmarks, and certainly the last 2 years, everything has been extended, both even just signing contracts to getting actual funding. It's certainly a lot of uncertainty, and more to come, even with things that might be happening later this week. So yeah, exactly. So
Tomorrow.
Yeah, you gotta be okay with a lot of non-structure and the ability to adapt, and then play kind of multi-level chess with the chessboard.
I'll ask another quick question and we'll open up for some of the questions from our students here. Let's say, they're looking for a new Defense Innovation Unit director. Let's say each one of you is the new DIU director, and you're going to brief Secretary Hegseth on what needs to be done to commercialize technology and get it, for defense purposes, better, faster, quicker. I mean, what's the one big change you'd like to see in our government, our Defense Department, or somewhere else in government to help us commercialize tech faster? What's your advice what's your plan for the Secretary of War?
So I would tell them that they need to develop their signaling as to what technologies they need.
Okay.
A little better, so that, and that signaling is basically, they've done signaling now through things like SBIRs and all of the different government, classic government technology funding arenas provide venture capitalists signaling on what technologies will win over time. But that signaling is sporadic, inconsistent, and they just want it magically to appear. And the other thing that happens is when they say, we do want to go with you, they expect the testing to be done, the manufacturing to be ready, so they don't have an idea.
Scale to be there.
They don't have an idea that it takes time to scale these things. Janelle's initial point was, we've got to move to an attributable environment where you're manufacturing, thousands, tens of thousands of these things. And the scale for manufacturing is not there. And the problem is that the Defense Department is not used to a system of providing you feedback and signals on what they will do and what they will eventually do.
So demand and signal, gotcha.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
I think the DoD actually has evolved quite well in the front of coming up with new types of contracting vehicles or grants to help bridge the valley of death. They have really helpful innovation units to help startups kind of navigate the contracting and procurement and funding ecosystem. I do think a lot more can be done, but want to give credit that it has, I think in the last 5 years or so, there have been some effort to try and evolve and modernize and change. I still think a lot more can be done on the contracting side, and it's great that OTAs are increasing in usage to help some startups, but it is so hard to navigate that ecosystem, and you can even Google, there's a spaghetti chart, literal spaghetti chart of how to navigate the contracting ecosystem, and I certainly think simplification, more clarity, transparency is the way to go. And I think, again, giving a lot of credit to the change that has been done, but a lot more needs to be done to get that more simplified.
Thank you, Janelle. Chris, any thoughts on that?
I don't disagree with all that. Obviously, that works against us, and we're experts at contracting. That's what we've done now for.
When he says us, he's
70+
speaking
years.
from the perspective of big defense primes versus some of the emerging tech startups that
Joe and
Janelle work with.
The government built us, right? Our processes mimic the Department of Defense. our levels, like my level is the same level as a rear admiral. I mean, in the company, and it's crazy how everything matches so perfectly. But we're custom built to navigate that system. And changes to that system are disruptive to us, which is opportunities to everyone else, which is great. But I think the real answer is not throw out everything that's been done in the past and just go for the new. It's try to figure out how to merge these two things together, right? How to put this new kit on those older platforms, or how to bring in new platforms that talks to the older platforms, right? What I see is missing is sort of the overall sort of mission planning for all this stuff, right? Oh, let's buy 1,000 drones, great. And then we have the Army buys 10,000 of those, and the Navy buys 10,000 of those, and they don't talk to each other, and does that really make sense? These folks have to work together. And so there needs to be a bit more communication thoughtfulness in how that goes together. And yet some of the changes, like giving the combatant commands more say, there's good and bad about that, right? They're gonna get exactly what they want, but there'll probably be less sharing amongst the different services as a result of that. So is that what we want? I mean, so who's up there looking at that and giving those signals across to everybody, and how do we all merge into that environment and provide the best kit at the lowest cost, in the shortest cycle time, with the most lethality and everything that they're looking for, right? So
We're bumping up on time. I'm going to give us some quick wrap-up remarks, and we'll let you go. And maybe if you have a burning question, you could pull one of our panelists before they head out there. But just start out, why do we care about defense technology? This is a lot of entrepreneurs here. Clearly, some stories of, because it's very profitable now. There's some great opportunities. So that's one reason. And I'm going to speak, I know this is an international crowd, so pardon me, I'm coming from a U.S. perspective, but I would also argue that investing in emerging technologies for defense purposes, it's a national security imperative to get it right. Way back during the Cold War, some of you none of you remember that. It's like, World War II, the Civil War, Antietam. We remember it, you don't remember it. We collectively, the U.S. and the West, I'm acknowledging my bias here, we prevailed in that war. And think about the defense-relevant technologies that helped us prevail in the Cold War. Where was it being developed from? From, government labs, big defense primes. And if we could build an incrementally better, large and exquisite system like an aircraft carrier, submarine, fighter jet, main battle tank, every 10 years or so, we could stay ahead of the Soviets, and we did that well. And we had big companies like Lockheed and others in the primes that helped us do that, and they still do that, and it's a very important role. But now the defense-relevant technologies, in addition to those large-end systems that we need to continue to develop and build incrementally better versions of every decade, we've got to you look at Ukraine, I mean, now the cycle is days and weeks, not decades, right? Think about the defense relevant technologies that are going to determine whether we prevail in future conflicts like we're seeing in Ukraine. It's AI, it's machine learning, it's cyber, it's autonomy, these types of technologies which our panelists invest so deeply in. And think about it, advances in those technologies, they're not coming from government directives, they're coming from consumer demand. So everything's changed, right? So if we want to prevail and maintain a strong defense, we have to develop our abilities to identify, adopt, and deploy those emerging technologies at speed and scale and get them to the hands of the warfighter. The stakes are pretty high, and so it's too important not to do it well. All of our panelists are in this business. This is a big defense innovation ecosystem, and we need our best and brightest to lean in whatever role that is, whether it's technologists, investors. I know we've got some veterans here. Folks in service, but the stakes are really high. I think we're going to see a lot of the future world order is going to be determined here, I think, in the next decade, and I think the degree to which we can maintain a strong defense with these emerging technologies is going to be really critical. So let's thank our panel members for all they're doing for it, and we'll see you next week.